This is the only type of medicine, the only type of healing that has ever existed since man has been on Earth. The American Medical Association was formed mostly in part, if you didn't follow our methods, you were excluded from the club. So it was only the club of the leeches and that kind of thing. Those two foundations started to fund the 31 schools, and they didn't allow anybody into the school unless you borrowed money from Carnegie and Rockefeller.
I have a master's degree in physiology, biomechanics, and human nutrition. I've spent the past 2 decades competing in some of the most masochistic events on the planet, from SealFit Kokoro, Spartan Agoge, and the world's toughest mudder, to 13 Ironman triathlons, brutal bow hunts, adventure races, spearfishing, plant foraging, freediving, bodybuilding, and beyond. I combine this intense time in the trenches with a blend of ancestral wisdom and modern science. Search the globe for the world's top experts in performance, fat loss, recovery, hormones, brain, beauty, and brawn to deliver you this podcast. Everything you need to know to live an adventurous, joyful, and fulfilling life. My name is Ben Greenfield. Enjoy the ride. Hey, before we jump into today's show, I want to tell you a couple of things. First of all, in my opinion, it takes my guest and I a little bit of time to warm up on this show, which is on bioregulatory medicine. And we really kind of scratched the surface of what he goes into in his book. I mean, everything from cancer profiles to digital pulse wave analysis to what's called contact regulation thermography, different forms of hormone analysis that I hadn't heard of before, neuroscan, what's called anthroposophical medicine based off of the teachings of Dr. Rudolf Steiner. And you know, I went through his whole book and I had so many protocols I wanted to ask him about. We got through, you know, like half a dozen of them, but I really want to encourage you, like after you hear today's show, if you like what you hear, definitely grab this guy's book. I will put it in the show notes for you. And it's again, like we kind of warm up in today's show, but I really think looking into bioregulatory medicine and educating yourself on this is pretty important. And as you may have heard, I'm actually bringing a bunch of people over to Switzerland this summer to spend 2 weeks doing all the protocols that are in this book, actually living at a health retreat where we get to do all the different types of therapies and almost like this detox that we don't get access to here in the States. It's designed to reboot your liver, reboot your digestive system, reboot your endocrine system. We'll be doing a lot of like hikes in the Swiss Alps in the sunshine. We'll be eating these amazing organic meals 3 times a day. We'll be served these wonderful meals. I'm taking my wife. My boys are going to be there. We'll be in the Italian court of Switzerland. So we're already like putting little Italian learning language stickers all over the house to start to learn our Italian. It's going to be one of the highlights of the year. And you can get in. There's just a few rooms left, but you can get into this thing if you go to greensmoothiegirl.com/Ben Greenfield. Green Smoothie Girl is Robin Openshaw. She's who I've kind of partnered with on putting this retreat on. It's in Switzerland. It's in this summer, 2019, late June, early July. If I can talk, greensmoothiegirl.com/Ben Greenfield. So check that out and enjoy this show. This podcast, like all of my podcasts, is brought to you by Kion, my playground for all things health and wellness. It's a company I created to kind of scratch my own itch to find pure and efficacious shotgun formulations of supplements and functional foods. Every single product that I have there is research backed. It's real world tested by me and my team of Regtag. I think I was trying to say Regtag. My Regtag team of trench testers there at Kion. We have an amazing team. We try all this stuff. We hike, we rock climb, we compete, we weight lift, and we try every single product for you. We figure out what gives you explosive diarrhea. Then we nix that stuff and give you the good stuff. So we created this entire company. You get a 10% discount on anything at Kion. Very simple. You go to getkion.com. That's getkion.com. And you use code BGF10. That gives you 10% off of anything at Kion, at getkion.com. My playground. This podcast is also brought to you by my buddy Drew Canoli's amazing green juice company. What they've managed to do is take a ton of different superfood ingredients, put them into one little canister that they ship to your house. One scoop of this stuff is like eating a whole salad without all the fiber and all the roughage and all the time and the chopping and the blending. If you're going to do like a green smoothie, they do all the work for you. Not that there's not something mindful meditation-esque about going out to your garden, picking kale and chopping it with your Japanese blade and hovering over that kale as you gingerly put it into the smoothie piece by piece. But just in case that's not you, the green juice from Organifi tastes amazing and skips all the time and the hassle. Just a bunch of super nutrients down your gullet. Tastes good too. You get 20% off of any of the fine products from Organifi. Go to Organifi.com. That's Organifi with an I. Organifi.com/Ben. And the code that you can use there is BenG20. That's BenG20. All right, let's go talk with Dr. Dixon Thom about detoxing ourselves. If you like what you hear, you can also go and detox with me for 2 weeks in the Swiss Alps. Go to greensmoothiegirl.com/Ben Greenfield to get in on all that goodness that we talk a little bit more about during today's show. As you probably know, I tend to get pretty enamored and enchanted and intrigued with all these different forms of medicine that tend to kind of fly under the radar of allopathic medicine, perhaps things that we don't do a lot here in America, for example, and also things that are more advanced techniques from diagnostics and treatments. And because of that, I'm always exploring these books on medicine. And I recently read this fantastic book called Bioregulatory Medicine. Bioregulatory Medicine. I'm going to let my guest on today's show define for you what exactly bioregulatory medicine is, but it went into all these things that really I haven't talked about a lot before on the show, like biomodulation and bioresonance and electrodermal testing and neuroscanning and also just the self-healing and regenerative properties of the human body when it's placed into the right conditions, the right biological terrain, so to speak, which we'll explore on today's show. Now, as we go, you can access everything that we talk about from the book, Bioregulatory Medicine, which was written by my guest today, over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/biomedicine. That's bengreenfieldfitness.com/biomedicine. So my guest on today's show is Dr. Dixon Thom, although I just learned when I was speaking with him before we started recording that if I want to sound like a sophisticated German, I would pronounce it Dr. Dixon Thom. His book is called Bioregulatory Medicine, an innovative holistic approach to self-healing. Dr. Thom graduated from the University of Toronto, Faculty of Dentistry in the 70s, and then he got his Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine from the Ontario College of Naturopathic Medicine in 1986. And in 1989, he got another naturopathic degree from National College of Naturopathic Medicine in Portland, Oregon. He was a full-time professor and the past dean of naturopathic medicine at that National College of Natural Medicine in Portland, where he taught things like gastroenterology and neurology and endocrinology, X-ray, for over 25 years. And he's now the medical director at the American Center for Biological Medicine and the American Center for Alternative Medicine in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I'll link to his place down there in the show notes as well, but it's the biomedcenter.com is the website for his current practice down in Scottsdale. So he is well informed, as you can imagine, with that deep history in natural medicine. We're going to take a deep dive into some of his expertise today. So Dr. Thom, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir. And I'm just curious. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this question, but I'm going to launch it at you right now. I'm curious how a guy who is as steeped in natural medicine as you are eats breakfast right before you come on and do a big podcast like this. Are you a fasting guy, a bacon and eggs, a green smoothie? What's your weapon over there?
I'm into or doing the intermittent fasting, partially keto, ketogenic, part paleo, trying to keep moderate carbs, more in the seed idea. So basically trying to eat fast for 16, 18 hours a day and then eat, within a 12 to, 6, 7 in the afternoon type thing. It's better from a biochemistry. It's better for balancing metabolism. And, as a physician for so many years and seeing so many patients with now more and more problems related to metabolic problems, this seems to be one of the ways that we're able to help people move more into a place that we call homeodynamics or homeostasis, which is really what biological medicine is really all about, is how do we get people back to balance and allow their own body to be able to do its own level of healing.
Yeah. Yeah. So coming full circle though, what'd you eat?
What did I eat today?
Yeah.
What I ate today is basically a protein, a couple of eggs, as you said, turkey bacon. I pretty much avoid carbs, so an avocado, like olive oil or coconut drink, coconut milk, that kind of stuff is a sort of a typical morning.
Eggs, turkey bacon, and avocado. That sounds pretty good. I could get on that bandwagon. I like it. I'm glad you didn't say Captain Crunch, or we would have had to tune you out for the rest of this episode.
No, that's not on the menu.
All right. Well, let's get into the topic at hand: bioregulatory medicine. I think a lot of people aren't going to be familiar with that term or exactly what it is. And you use terms like bioregulatory medicine and even terms like biofield and biological terrain in your book. So you can take as deep a dive as you'd like, but I'd love to hear about what your definition of bioregulatory medicine exactly is, and some of these terms like biofield and biological terrain.
Indeed. And indeed, this may be a bit of a lengthy answer because I'm going to sort of give a little bit of a hysterical perspective. Because in reality, this is the only type of medicine, the only type of healing that has ever existed since man has been on Earth. If we go back way into the history of medicine and we look at Babylonia, or we look at China, or we look at Egypt and India, we're talking thousands of years ago. What they did, and we tend to think that the medicine was so rudimentary they didn't really know anything. But using Chinese medicine as the example, and the whole idea of how Chinese medicine has survived. And what is Chinese medicine? Chinese medicine, people think, oh, it's acupuncture, or it's herbs and that type of thing. But what it really is it's about balancing energy flows. If we look at then what the Greeks talked about, and in the last 2,000 years of how medicine has evolved, we've got into this so-called scientific method, and it wasn't until, which I'll talk about in a bit, the Flexner Report, which is 100 years ago, that medicine really made a huge shift in the direction of what is biological medicine, bioregulatory medicine. So the so-called new field of medicine, or an emerging field of medicine, is known as a biofield. A biofield is a word that basically is used to describe energies that the body is associated with. It is well known that, for all intents and purposes, the body is one huge electromagnet. We have voltages, we have electrical charges. And,
well, if I could interrupt there, I don't know if that's generally accepted. I think a lot of people don't really understand, the concepts that, for example, Dr. Robert Becker delves into in the book The Body Electric, that the body is an electromagnetic organism. So you may want to clarify for some people who might not really be familiar with that idea.
So the idea, I think people can hopefully agree that the body at least gives off energy. I mean, we always talk about how is your energy, are you fatigued, or that type of thing. So we know that energy is being promoted and made somehow in the body to do all the things that we do. How can we basically move any muscles if we don't have some type of gasoline or some type of fuel in our muscles themselves? And it comes down to that it's really an electrical charge. If we bend our arm, what we're basically creating is electrons, and these electrons are creating like a battery that's running every piece of equipment that we now have in society. So this idea that there's a field of energy, that we have an electromagnetic energy associated with it, But then if you look back into what the Chinese have talked about, the Chinese have talked about these subtle energies. The Chinese call it qi. Naturopathic medicine calls it a vis. So it's this subtle energy that maybe not be as easy to measure, although things like Kirlian photography are able to pick up very subtle energies and measure that in fact there are energies that are associated with the body itself. People may be familiar or not familiar with the idea that some people have the ability to read these very subtle energies and are able to influence these energies. And these are the energies that allow all our organ systems to function and to interact with each other.
Right, with perhaps the simplest example being just either the electron transport chain in the mitochondria or the potassium-sodium electrochemical gradient across the cell membrane. I mean, I think those are two simple examples people may have even seen in high school biology. I just don't think they think about it when they're standing next to their Wi-Fi router or under fluorescent lights that electricity interacts with the human body and vice versa.
Very much so, and we now know, of course, with the exposure to Wi-Fi pretty much everywhere, we're constantly being exposed to cell towers. We're constantly being exposed to in our homes with routers and Wi-Fi's. The effect that type of energy is having on us on a long-term basis, and I typically think that Europe is sort of a way ahead of us. What the United States is ahead of us. You know, for example, I'll call them their banning of cell phones for children, knowing that the cell phone radiation in a child where their brain hasn't fully developed, if they hold it up to their ear, literally can be transported directly through their entire head. So in some countries in Europe, cell phones are basically not allowed for children until they're 18 years of age, until there's some more maturation of that type of thing. So the idea of bioregulatory uses this concept that our body is really about energy. It's about physiology, it's about biochemistry, and it's about physics. And breaking it down to that aspect, if we look at physics, you can talk about Newton in the 1700s. He came up with Newton's law, and unfortunately, to this day, conventional medicine still sort of believes that that's the model of how medicine, how the body heals, how we have to repair itself. But long before Newton came along, the Chinese had come into this idea of energy. And then in 1927, we had Einstein and Max Planck basically come out with their idea of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, which ultimately led to the discovery and the utilization of the atomic bomb, and the realization that how much energy gets packed into every cell. So every cell in our body has an organelle in it that will make energy, as you mentioned, the electron transport chain. And so if you have enough oxygen present within the mitochondria, they have the ability to make these little packets of energy that we call ATP, up to something like 38 packs of energy when there's sufficient oxygen. If you don't have any oxygen, they can only make 2 parts of ATP. And people say, oh, is that why I'm tired? Well, maybe one of the reasons you're tired, generally speaking, but it's still based on electrons. As you mentioned, the potassium-sodium pump is the way that minerals move across cell membranes. So there's a lot of aspects of that we have to put into this picture. So when we look at bioregulatory, what are we really talking about? We're talking about the idea that there are multiple systems, multiple organ systems within our body. And while we tend to think of them, or that they may be individual, so you have a heart, you have a cardiovascular system, you have an endocrine system, you have a digestive system, you have a lymphatic system, you have a nervous system. And unfortunately, what's happened in medicine is that we have all these specialties. And all the specialties don't really talk to all the other specialties. And so they would look at their own individual organ. But when you're trying to grow a new heart cell, let's say you have something wrong in your digestive system, and you go to the gastroenterologist and they say, oh, this is what we found, this is the problem. Well, you can't just have one specialist repair what's necessary. If your house is blowing down in a hurricane, you don't say, well, let's get some nails and we have a new house. You have to have every single piece of the part in order to build a new house. That's the same with the body. In order to rebuild a digestive cell that may have been damaged or repaired or something, food poisoning or something, let's say, you can't just say, well, just eat food X. which is why I'm sort of against these so-called miracles that show up on the internet saying, oh, take this if you have disease Y or disease X, or if you have cancer, this is the miracle. There is no miracle in the body. It's about balancing every single organ system. So the real focus of bioregulatory medicine is not to look at people's symptoms. It's not to treat diseases. It's to try and understand which of the organ systems are the most out of balance electrically, and what can we do to be able to facilitate all those cells getting back into balance again. So we're not specialists. I'm not a specialist in anything. I feel I'm a specialist in health, but I'm certainly not a specialist in disease. Because disease simply means something is out of balance. It's out of ease.
Yeah.
So our goal is how do we put it back in ease?
Now you talk about the biofield when it comes to actually being able to measure all of these elements of the human body that are in interplay together. Can you define that a little more specifically, what the biofield is? And you even talked about like Kirlian photography, for example, which I think kind of gets an eyebrow raised at it in modern medicine. But I'm curious if that's how you would actually measure something like the biofield, or if some of this stuff is a little bit more quantifiable beyond this light photography.
By definition, we could say that the biofield is used to describe the field of energy and information that basically surrounds us. Our body has a confinement by our skin, but the reality is our energy isn't confined by our skin. Our energy emanates, and when you're in the room of a lot of other people, or when you're in a relationship for a long time, people start to say you start to look alike, talk alike, feel alike, because you're transferring energy back and forth between the individuals without physically touching them. So the biofield is this information, this energy information that surrounds us, both the electromagnetic energy and, as I said, this subtle energy. And the whole idea of biofield is pertaining to us as living individuals, is to then look at these energy fields that extend beyond our body. And how are we able to create a proper balance for what's going on? Now, Kirlian photography is one of the ways that's been around for a period of time that has allowed people, and we have very sophisticated imagery now. If we go back to the microscope back in the 1700s, when before they were able to see something that's at a microscopic level, it was some abstract idea. Well, since the 1700s, when von Leeuwenhoek invented the microscope, and then now we have these atomic microscopes, and you can literally see within cells, within organelles, et cetera, of what's happening. So Kirlian photography, or that type of imagery, is a way to be able to measure those types of things, and we are creating much more of an understanding of why and how the body gets out of balance and the things that can interfere with that. And it'll still come down to, if the body cannot create enough electrical energy through sodium-potassium pumps and that type of thing, it's going to not be able to create enough energy. It's not going to be able to communicate with other cells because there is an interaction between cells that, they literally we know that they can talk to each other. Now, those types of things with the scientific, the information we have, can actually be measured now.
How does Kirlian photography actually work?
It works from the aspect that it's literally picking up energy waves. We look at the electromagnetic spectrum, and what the one that people are most familiar with, of course, is visible light, and we look at the rainbow. But we use the electromagnetic spectrum on all levels, from the idea of X-rays on one end, and microwaves, and pictures that we ultimately take, radio waves, and those types of things. It's a different frequency that everything is associated with it, and through the technology that Kirlian photography was developed, it's able to pick up these very subtle energies that can't be seen, can't be felt. Going back to, once again, Einstein, is light a particle, or is it an energy wave type thing? I can't explain it more than that because I'm not a physicist.
Well, we know that
that
cells communicate using photons of light. I mean, there's a great deal of infrared communication that occurs between cells. That's to my knowledge pretty recent research that shows that form of cellular communication can occur. So it's likely that photography that is able to capture light photons is potentially capturing that ability for cells to communicate. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think as time goes on, we become the scientists and the physicists become much more sophisticated, and we'll be able to pick up much more energy. The whole idea is are we going to be able to find the magic of health, and the magic of the human body? And I think we're a long way away from that because there's a lot of things that the universe holds secret from us and will continue to do so. So we have to do our best to understand what we do know. And we have moved a long way since the Egyptians and the Greeks, but still have a long way to go.
You talk in the book a lot about this idea that the human body is capable of, under the right circumstances, self-regeneration, or that has self-healing properties to it. What exactly does that mean? Like, what was an example of a self-healing or self-regenerative property that would be kind of enhanced by bioregulatory medicine?
That's a great question. And in fact, if it wasn't for the fact that every cell in our body has the ability to self-regenerate, to heal itself, we would never be able to, we would basically be exposed to the first bug, first germ, first trauma, and we wouldn't be able to survive it. So I'm going to use something that many of your listeners will already have experienced, which is a broken bone. So if you were to fall down and break your wrist, you go to the doctor, the orthopedist, they basically put a cast on. They take an X-ray at 3 weeks. They take an X-ray at 6 weeks and say your bone is healed. And say, so what does that suggest that the cast healed the bone? No, the cast didn't do anything. All the cast did was immobilize it. So the body, the intuitive aspects of nutrition, of oxygen, of blood, of hormones, and everything else that's necessary for healing, basically was able to form a callus at where the break was. And then the bone was actually healed in about 6 weeks. And we know that bone is actually stronger now from where it healed than it was originally. What's also interesting when you think about self-healing is, technically everything we know about nutrition, we could put in a petri dish. We could put two pieces of bone in that petri dish, very approximate them so they don't move with all the nutrients, but yet it doesn't heal. So there's more to it, and this is what we call the subtle energy. This is the chi energy. This is the vis energy. This is the biofield energy that's necessary for the self-regulation to heal. If you damage your macula in your eye, within 2 days, it's repaired itself. The cells of your digestive system are turning over about every 3 weeks. He said that the bone is like 6 weeks. And so every cell in our body eventually regenerates and repairs itself. Our skin turns over every few weeks. It's like, that's what self-regeneration is.
The liver's an interesting one. There's even mythology behind that. I forget I think it's like the Greek mythology of the guy who gets his liver pecked out by an eagle every day and it regrows overnight. And that's actually been shown that, that I think a good quarter of a liver can regenerate back to its full size within like half a year.
That is correct. In fact, doing liver transplants, I mean, you could take a young child who has some type of a genetic liver disease, who has a very tiny liver, but you can take an adult liver and you can just slice off a piece of that liver, put it in the child, and that liver will grow. Or if in an adult, if they had an adenoma of some type, that you could resect that out. In fact, I've had several patients in this situation. They've resected part of the liver, and within 6 months, the liver is back to its normal size. It's the only organ, however, unfortunately, we have that will do that. If we cut our arm off, it doesn't regrow again.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, even nerves can regenerate, and that's a lot of times approach used, in kind of a multimodal approach to Alzheimer's and dementia. Things like huperzine or apigenin or lion's mane mushroom they'll use to actually stimulate nerve regenerative effects and heal up nerves. And I believe that many of those are the same type of compounds that are used in some of these more natural forms of medicine, like naturopathic medicine or bioregulatory medicine. But in light of all of this, the fact that we know know that the human body works via an interplay of all these complex systems, that we shouldn't treat just one system at a time. We know that the body operates based on, in many cases, not just cell signaling, as far as like neurotransmitters and nerve synapses or exosomes, for example, but also via photons of light packets and even protons themselves. I'm curious, why don't more Western medical practitioners use this approach? And I know that you mentioned the Flexner Report, which I believe has something to do with this, but I'm wondering if you can get into that. Like why isn't bioregulatory medicine something more people are aware of or practice?
It's a great question, and I wish, I'll talk about the Flexner Report because of the whole aspect that it's really the Flexner Report. Let's sort of give a little bit of background on that. In 1857, the American I think May the 4th, 1857, the American Medical Association was formed. It was formed with the idea that there will be a club, there would be like-minded physicians who practice in a specific way, who would have basically the idea of sharing information, etc. When you look back at the history of medicine in the 1800s, you look at the most common types of the recognized forms of medicine at that time was bloodletting, which is how basically George Washington died. It was the use of purgatives, it was the use of carminatives, it was the use of leeches, bloodletting, all that kind of thing. Now, also at the time, coming from Europe, medical was the concepts of energy medicine, specifically homeopathy. Through Hahnemann, who in 1822 had published, one of his first books, The Organon, with the whole idea that we could use the law of similars, like cures like, that type of thing, of using different types of medicine. And it became that style medicine over the 30 and 40 years throughout Europe, and was now coming to the United States. The patients who were going to see a homeopathic physician were having better success than the conventional medicine doctors who were using cathartics, purgatives, leeches, etc. And because people doing those, such as Washington, died from the treatment, as opposed to the homeopathic, which were much more gentle and were actually allowing people to get better. So in 1857, the American Medical Association was formed mostly in part if you didn't follow our methods. If you did homeopathy, for example, if you did eclectic herbal medicine, for example, you were excluded from the club. So it was only the club of the leeches and that kind of thing. And so, and through the rest of the 1800s, there was these for-profit medical schools. They weren't, and with all honesty, they were many times not properly trained. There was not, good schooling and that type of thing. So it was commissioned by the Carnegie in the early 1900s, and then in 1910, Carnegie, who was not a physician and he was not a medical educator, he was not a scientist, he was a Bachelor of Arts person. He was hired by the Carnegie Foundation to look at the 155 schools that were medical schools that were in Canada and the United States at that time. And he visited all 155 schools in something like 163 days. So he was a busy man. And then at the end of that, he published a report. And that report basically laid the foundation, almost to this day, of how medicine was being taught, how medicine was being practiced.
That was the Flexner Report?
That's the Flexner Report.
Okay, so what did he report?
There were some very positive things that he reported. He reported that there wasn't enough education for people. They needed a minimum of high school education, and there needed to be standardization of what they were being taught, et cetera, et cetera. So he suggested that they reduce 155 schools to 31 schools. He said that we needed to have some type of prerequisites to know a little bit about, you needed a high school diploma, you needed to study anatomy, and then study physiology, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was some good things that came from that, and that is still taught. In fact, it's taught in every medical type of an institution nowadays. However, on the other side of the coin was what he also reported, that some of these very unfortunate things, and not to offend any of our listeners, but one of the things he reported is he felt that blacks were inferior. And he basically said all schools teaching blacks medicine should be closed. The idea was that there was the germ theory at the time, and that blacks living in sort of their inner community had certain diseases, and they would carry those diseases into upper white class white, who were the people that they basically wanted in the medical schools. He also, because medicine had continued to face a competition from osteopathic medicine at that time, the eclectic medicine, naturopathic medicine, homeopathic medicine, electrotherapies, etc. He basically said, "Well, I don't believe in any of those." So he basically said, "You can no longer teach those in any of the medical schools." So in like 1900, there were more homeopathic doctors than there were conventional doctors. 1923, all the homeopathic schools had closed, and I believe there was 2 that were left. And by 1950, they were all closed. There've been a few that have been open since. So for all intents and purposes, in 1910, medicine totally changed, and it's still taught that way. So why do Western doctors? First of all, they don't know about it. I would bet most don't know about the Flexner Report. They don't. And if you're not taught the whole idea that energy medicine is the root of all illness, it's like, because that's not what's taught in the school. We're still following the Newtonian idea that, oh, it's broken, take it out, put a new part in. Well, that's not how the body's ever going to feel. We just talked about the arm. You can't just put the 2 pieces of the bone together and say, well, have it heal. There's an energy that's associated with it. That's the biofield energy that we talked about earlier.
So what you're saying, to interrupt about the Flexner Report, is that his report led to the shutting down of all these complementary and alternative-oriented colleges and programs like homeopathic colleges or some of these natural medical schools. But what was left in terms of approved medical education programs, they're actually funded by philanthropic organizations like Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation. But those foundations also had a lot of money in the pockets of pharmaceutical companies.
Well, it's interesting when you look at it is that, in fact, those 2 foundations started to fund the 31 schools, and they didn't allow anybody into the school unless you borrowed money from Carnegie and Rockefeller, which meant that when you graduated, you basically had to pay them back. And guess what Carnegie and Rockefeller were into? Were into pharmaceuticals. So they were some of the first pharmaceutical companies. So this is what they were teaching. This is what they were promoting. And this is what's been promoted since 1910.
Wow, it's crazy. So that's one of the reasons that a lot of docs don't learn this stuff, is it's simply not part of the medical education that tends to be funded in large part by the pharmaceutical industry, but began with this Flexner Report shutting down some of the education on more of these kind of natural bioregulatory concepts.
That's absolutely true. And what's interesting, as I said, he even wanted to close the schools of osteopathy. But now we know, so the Osteopathic Association at the time somehow fought back. So now, whether you have a DO behind your name or an MD behind your name, it's exactly the same, because the osteopathic schools basically said, okay, we'll teach exactly. So what we do in the osteopathic schools is we'll do some, I'll say, physical manipulation, which they're excellent at. And I mean, they learn some aspects of that, but it's still very conventional. It's still very the idea that it's pharmaceutical based. It's the same concepts that is taught in basically every medical school, even though the osteopaths were, by the Flexner Report, were supposed to be closed.
Hey, I want to interrupt today's show to tell you about clothing sustainably made from recycled plastics. That's right. My podcast sponsor, Vuori, which is actually the clothing you're going to see me in about 90% of the time these days if you catch me working out at the gym. They just launched these brand new shorts called Banks shorts, and they are perfect for workouts. They're great for surfing, paddling, training, yoga. They have this really cool athletic fit with 4-way stretch, with a quick dry. They're very comfortable, just built-in support. They're super simple to clean. They're super simple to work out in. Not that shorts in general aren't simple to work out in, but these ones move with your body. They look really good. That's what I like about Vuori, though, is I can also wear these pretty much anywhere I want to be mildly fashionable and not look like I just walked out of the gym, not look like a gym rat. Jim Rat. Anyways, though, Viore makes amazing athletic gear. They have a whole bunch of stuff aside from these new bank shorts, but check them out. You can get 25% off of any of the stuff from Viore, but it's spelled Vuori. One of those weird to spell and pronounce companies. But you go to VioreClothing.com, Vuori clothing.com. You enter the code BEN25. You get 25% off your purchase. And I do recommend, may I recommend to you as your short sommelier, the Viore Banks shorts, the ultimate in versatility. Speaking of clothing, this podcast is also brought to you by Birdwell Beach Breeches. You got your Viore shorts for your workouts, but these Birdwell Beach Breeches, oh my gosh, anytime you want to go to the beach or the pool, these are the shorts for you. You actually look great in them. You don't need the perfect summer body to look good in Birdwell Beach Breeches because they build their shorts with innovative cuts to suit every single body type and usage, from casual adventurers to expert watermen. And what I like about them is they're impossible to break. They're impossible to break. If a seam or a stitch or a grommet breaks on these shorts, you just send it back to the factory. They fix it for you. They're actually built with this surf stretch, 4-way stretch microfiber, and they're fashioned based on inspiration from sailboat sails, and they have this proprietary 2-ply nylon fabric, the most durable fabric out there. You'd think that you'd look like you're wearing a sailboat sail, but you're not. These things look really, really amazing. They fit perfectly. They make your body look good. They're called Birdwell Beach Breeches. Lifetime guarantee. Free shipping for any order over $99. How do you like that? You go to birdwell.com and you'll get 10% off plus the lifetime guarantee plus the free shipping over $99 if you use code BENG at checkout. That's BENG. Pick up your first pair of birdies and see why they've been an American icon since 1961. It's a freaking long time. Now that we've established what bioregulatory medicine actually is, I want to get into some of the brass tacks here, some of the actual ways in which it's practiced. And the first thing I wanted to actually ask you about is diet, because the way that you describe diet in the book is a very seasonal approach. Based on the master fuel sensor, mTOR, which tends to be, for example, I believe more active, during some of these summer months, and things change in the winter and times of calorie restriction. But I'm curious if you can kind of get into the science behind this seasonal eating approach and how that would actually work with something like bioregulatory medicine.
Once again, the best, when I sort of look at, there's 1,001 diet, there's a 10,001 diet books that have been promoted and that type of thing. So I always look back at, what did our indigenous cultures eat? What did they have? What did they survive on? We can go back to Weston Price, who basically was a Canadian dentist, who in the 19-teens and 20s went to 7 sort of areas of the world that at that time had not been sort of westernized. So he went into the Eskimos and the Aborigines in Australia and places in the Alps that hadn't sort of been touched. And he looked at their diets. And the diets of those people were always indigenous to the food, the plants, the animals, fish, or whatever was local to that specific area. That's obviously what they had. They didn't have high-speed transportation to take something growing from Mexico and eat it in Spokane, Washington type thing, or up in Juneau, Alaska. So, and what he found is that there was a very common overlap to what these people ate. In addition to, and we talk about the Eskimos. They said, "What the heck did the Eskimos eat? Should we eat a plant-based diet?" They said, "What was growing up at the North Pole? There's not." So they were eating walruses. They were eating polar bears. So they basically had almost an entire meat diet that was high in omega fatty acids, and yet they didn't have any heart disease. Then you go into somewhere where the Aborigines are, we're almost in the desert of Australia, and say, well, what are they growing? They're once again, they're eating local animals and local plants. And so, some of the herbology that has evolved through these generations, the Aborigines and the Maoris in New Zealand have been there for thousands of years before the white man ultimately appeared and introduced these types of diets. If we look at what the Chinese are very resourceful. The Chinese, continue to eat anything that's local to the area, including insects and scorpions and, trees and all that kind of stuff. So we look at what we do and and so if we look at that and we look at the evolution of the human body, we look at the evolution of our nervous system, of our endocrine system, our lymphatic systems, et cetera, what supported that? And so what supported that were based on different seasons. If you were in Europe, you had different foods in the wintertime than in the summertime. And if you were in South Africa, you had more or less similar foods year round. So what the Chinese have found, because parts of China get incredibly cold, is that during the wintertime, when we tend to hibernate, of course, we put on a few pounds. We put on a few pounds because we're less active, but we also eat more nutrient foods. It's like a bear, where basically we're sort of living off our body fat. And the body has evolved to be able to do that. We're in colder climates, the body has to generate a lot more heat. So it's preferred that in the wintertime or in the colder months, we eat warmed up foods. In the summertime, where it's hotter, when we don't need to generate as much heat, we can eat cooler foods, salads and raw vegetables and raw fruits, etc. And typically, from a bioregulatory aspect, we look at not only how a person's digestive system is, but where do you live? Where did you grow up? Where did your ancestors come from? What have your genetics actually allowed you to be able to do? And yes, we have the ability to, eat lots of raw foods, but since we're in the wintertime in this part of the world, should not be eating very many cold foods. And especially if you're going to eat a cold food, whether it's a fruit or whatever, eating something out of the refrigerator is not a good idea, because in the refrigerator, the food is going to be about freeze. Now we say, well, what temperature? How does the body digest this? Well, we have a normal body temperature. Our normal body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. People say, well, where did that come from? Like, is that a made up number, or who has 98.6? Like, where did that number come from? Well, that number came from the fact that the enzymes in our body necessary to digest our food functions at about 98.3 plus or minus 90 plus or minus 0.3, so 98.3 to 98.9. So if you eat a food at 40 degrees, put it in your body, the body says, what the heck's that? I guess I have to cook the food in my own digestive system. And people say, well, no wonder I get tired after I eat this food, because it takes a lot of my energy. 40% of your blood is being shunted into your digestive system for a couple of hours to digest this food.
And it does not, contrary to popular belief, cause you to lose more fat when you do that, because you've amped up your thermic effect of food. It's simply it's not a good weight loss strategy to chew on ice, for example. But what I like that you get into in the book is how we have this master fuel sensor, mTOR, the mammalian target of rapamycin, and it facilitates anabolism, right, like protein synthesis and growth. And that actually is something that tends to be more active under the sunlight, during the summer. And then during the winter, you have a different master fuel sensor, AMP activated protein kinase, or AMPK, which is more of kind of the enzyme responsible for stimulating the recycling of cellular materials. So it's almost like we were designed to build muscle and even perhaps fat in the summer, and then break it down in the winter as we cycle between mTOR activation and AMPK activation.
That is the evolution that the body has had to be able to survive. And, now we have the scientific knowledge, and, we've done the research to be able to show that. Of course, if you go back into your ancestors, if we go back 200 years ago, it's like, why do you eat soups? Why do you eat broths in the wintertime and eat, raw plants in the summertime? It's because of what you're talking about. And so the body had to adapt via these mechanisms, the same way as, why do we have so-called LDL, which is a so-called bad cholesterol? What did that evolve for? And, why is it bad? It's like, why do we have LDL? LDL is the plug. He said, well, it's bad because it plugs up your arteries. But if you go back, 1,000 years and say, well, there was no hospitals, there was no doctors who were going to sew you up. So if you were under stress and you were about to be, bitten by a tiger or whatever and started bleeding, the only way you plugged the hole was to raise your LDL. So it's a natural evolution. Just like, people, the blacks from Africa who migrated up to Europe, dark skin, so they had dark skin so they would be able to protect themselves from the sun. But once they moved to Europe, they didn't have that. So there's an evolutionary aspect of the ApoE4, which has to do with Alzheimer's and heart disease and a whole bunch of other things. So the fact of why we have what we do and why we've modified what we do. We live in a society where we move around a lot. Food moves around a lot, but we should still be looking for the most part for things that are the most indigenous to our what our backgrounds are, and indigenous to the areas from what we're eating. And you just described the two areas exactly. We add fat in the summer so we can burn it off, and that's what a bear does when it goes to sleep all winter.
I have three books that I think are fantastic for people who really want to take a deep dive into both eating according to our ancestry and seasonal eating. One is called 100 Million Years of Food by Stephen Lee. One's called The Jungle Effect by Dr. Daphne Miller, and then one's called Return to an Ancestral Diet by Dr. Michael Smith. I like all three of those books to really wrap your head around not only how to eat like your ancestors, but also how to eat seasonally. So I'll put a link to those books if you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/biomedicine, because that's intriguing stuff. We could talk for hours about it, or you could go check out those books. And I want to talk now about some of the things that you use in your practice, or some of the things that a bioregulatory medical practitioner would use. And I realize, again, we could talk for a very long time about each of these, but I'd just love to hear kind of a basic overview of some of the things in the book that I found most intriguing. So the first was a compound that I don't see talked about a lot, but that you harp on in the book, and that would be mistletoe. Why is it that mistletoe would be a component of bioregulatory medicine?
Mistletoe is an interesting compound that's obviously been around for forever. And if we look back historically, and I always like to look back historically at where from, and why are they still in our culture, and what does it come to mean? And I think what most people idea of mistletoe is you hang the mistletoe at Christmas time and you kiss under the mistletoe. It's like, so is that a legend? Is there, what did that ultimately come from? So mistletoe itself basically is one of the four plants traditionally that were adopted by Christians to celebrate Christmas. And so the idea of the evergreen leaves were to symbolize life that does not die. So it's sort of eternal life. Which is, so from a spiritual or religious aspects. And then the Druids, back in the Middle Ages, they venerated the oak as if they believed it had magical powers against evil. So it started off somewhat mystical, we'll say. Certainly in religious ceremonies, there was this belief that the leaves did symbolize life. There did become, supposedly, I think from Greek mythology again, this whole idea that kissing under the mistletoe was a person was shot with an arrow, and then her mother kissed her, and all that kind of stuff. So what do we typically, and what has it typically been used for? And it's basically used routinely throughout Europe. In virtually any cancer clinic you go to in Europe, you'll find that mistletoe is one of the therapies, along with every other treatment that they typically do.
When you say it's a therapy, how is it used? Like in a supplement form, or is it an injection, or some other delivery?
All deliveries. It's used as a supplement. It can be used as an herbal form. It can be used as an injectable form. It can be done IV. It can be done IM. It can be inhaled. So it's put in various forms, basically depending on where we're attempting to use it. So we get extracts from it, and as I said, we have available to us mistletoe herbal formulas. In Europe, you would basically find it in injectable forms. The FDA is not as keen on it being, or maybe, I don't know if it's the FDA, but maybe the oncology aspects is not as open in the United States. But if you ended up in a clinic in Europe for cancer, I guarantee you would be exposed to the.
Well, I'm actually going to Paracelsus Clinic in Switzerland. I'm leading a retreat over at Paracelsus Clinic in Switzerland this summer. And I think, they actually use a lot of the protocols that you talk about in the book, like, colonic hydrotherapy and hyperthermia and ozone, but I believe they do some kind of mistletoe therapy as well. And if I'm not mistaken, is it a lot of times used for autoimmune type of issues?
Mistletoe can be used as many herbs. I tend to feel that we tend to try and compartmentalize things, and a lot of pharmaceutical medicine is we take extracts of plants. Bioregulatory medicine, instead of using the extract, why don't we use the whole plant? Because there's everything. What's a great thing about nature is when nature has a poison plant, right beside it, it has the antidote. And so if an animal happens to eat a poison plant, guess what? It's going to eat the plant right beside it also, which will basically antidote the poison. So the idea that we can use an herb, for a single extract instead, it's about regulation. It's about creating eternal life, which sort of comes from the spiritual or the mystical aspect of this, of what it's doing. So as a use for autoimmune, we say, well, what's an autoimmune disease? And autoimmune disease, people think, oh, it's a hyperreaction. We have over 85 autoimmune diseases that have been identified in our body, and people think, oh, hyperreactive immune system. The reality is, autoimmune doesn't mean it's hyperreactive. It means it's out of balance. It's the balancing between the different aspects of the immune system are not functioning efficiently and properly. So you can take natural herbs, you can take natural substances, and what are they attempting to do? They're not trying to suppress. If you look at the standard treatment of autoimmunity, it's like using prednisone or a medication that basically stops a reaction. We don't try and stop anything. We try and support it. We try to, make it more in balance. Just like, from bioregulatory perspective, if somebody has a fever, our goal isn't to say, oh, take an Advil or Tylenol to lower your fever, because that's going anti. So the word allopathic means opposite medicine. So we're not doing the opposite medicine, we're doing the supportive medicine. So if somebody has a fever, what I would suggest that they do is to their level of comfort, they should maintain the fever. So, if you're comfortable at 102, uncomfortable meaning you're thinking that it's going to be a problem, especially with children, people are always concerned. They're thinking, oh, if they have a high fever, they potentially may have, a febrile seizure. And it's true. Sometimes they do. It's more based on not what the temperature is, it's how fast the temperature rises. But what we would more support is, well, let's support because we know that, what is the best antimicrobial thing we know in the world? It's called heat. That's why we cook our food. You stick and if
that's
you
also
want
why people get a fever when they're sick.
Totally, because it's the body's natural way to basically fight the microbe, the virus, the bacteria, whatever it is. You can say, if you're going to cook your turkey dinner, would you rather cook it at 100 degrees or put it in the oven at 450 degrees? So at 100 degrees, it'll cook, but it'll take you 5 days. You put it at 450 and it'll take you, 15 hours. So we can basically allow the body to create the fever and you'll be done in 24 hours. Or basically you can try and, keep suppressing the fever and be sick for 7 days. So it's like, yes, you're not comfortable for a day, but man, it's the best way we can try to get our immune systems in balance. So whether it's mistletoe or the many other potential herbal or other supportive therapies that we have available to us, everything that we do, as I said, is not about the symptom. It's about understanding the organ system. It's about understanding the physics, the biochemistry, and the physiology. That's what we're really supporting, because that's how the body gets out of balance. And if we support the physiology with our treatments, it's to put it back into that. It's not to stop the reaction. I always say to people who have a headache, if you have a headache and you take a Tylenol, and so what happened to the headache? They said, well, it went away. I said, no. So does that mean the headache was due to a Tylenol deficiency if it went away? And of course, no, you still have the headache. You just can't feel it.
Yeah.
It could be your blood sugar or blood pressure or neck or sleep or whatever else. That's really what we're trying to address in bioregulatory medicine.
Yeah, and with mistletoe, in many cases, if people are interested in, either the injectable form or an extract or some type of protocol for it, or a few of the other bioregulatory medical tactics I want to ask you about, is there kind of a directory or a place to find a practitioner who's well-versed in these type of protocols? Is there such a thing as a bioregulatory medical practitioner directory or something like that?
Unfortunately, not yet, but it's coming. And in fact, what I've been working on for the last year is a curriculum to be able to teach physicians who are interested in sort of expanding their knowledge base into this type of an approach. So we're creating a curriculum which will basically involve teaching practitioners, in fact, teaching an entire clinic, entire office, the nurse, the MA, the support staff, of how we can introduce these types of therapies and then make them available to their patients. There is a couple of institutes, the Marion Institute in Marion, Massachusetts, the Bioregulatory Medicine Institute that's in Louisville, Kentucky, have sites and have a lot of information available, and those are probably the two most present available pieces of information that you could use.
I know in the back of your book you've got a list of a few different bioregulatory organizations and clinics as well. So
right.
One I think was the MarianInstitute.org and the Biological Medicine Network at that website.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
I'll link to that one and to your clinic in the show notes for people. Okay, let's talk about a few protocols here that I think would be very interesting to people that I hadn't heard of before until I read your book. Contact regulation thermography, or CRT. What is that?
CRT is the aspect of measuring 119 points on the body. Basically, and what we know from Chinese medicine is that we know that, there are multiple points. In acupuncture, there are 900,000 points on the body that they would basically stick acupuncture needles. And so what are they doing? They're finding energy points on the body. So contact regulation thermography, CRT, is a diagnostic tool where we basically are measuring 119 points, and those 119 points link to about 15 different organ systems. They link to over 20 different types of tissues. So we measure. So there is the preparatory aspect is you don't shower that morning, you don't brush your teeth, you don't wash your hair, you don't eat breakfast, you drink water, etc. So you come in basically it's like you get out of bed type of thing. We do the 119 points. Then what we do is we stress the body. We put the body under some form of a stress. So what we use during the test is cold. So the person sits basically in their underwear, basically their skin all exposed for 10 or 15 minutes, which is a stress to the body. Then we go back and we remeasure the same 119 points. Then what we do is we graph the before, we graph the after. So we have the before points, we have the after points. Typically, when we stress these different points, what should happen is that there should be a slight change in the temperature. We say about half a degree, more or less, of all the different points we're measuring. So when we compare the points, we can say, well, when you're not stressed, when things are pretty even, this is what's happening. Now, as soon as we stress these points, we say, oh, your digestive system isn't working properly, or your nervous system isn't working properly, or your lymphatic system is really congested, or you're not getting good blood flow into your teeth, or you have prostate congestion, or you have breast congestion, or you have chest congestion. And we're able to pinpoint very accurately in a quick and efficient way an aspect of seeing what truly happens when your body is perceived by stress. And stress can be anything. Stress can be a happy thing, it can be a sad thing, it can be going to work is stressful, it can be almost in a car accident, it can be hearing bad news, whatever. So, and of course, if you don't feel these things, people say, oh, I didn't know my digestive system wasn't very helpful when I'm under stress. And the patients who have irritable bowel syndrome perhaps say, oh, gee, if I'm going to go out and do something, I'll have, a loose bowel per se. Okay, we diagnose that as irritable bowel. But most people are not aware that their digestive system is not in good place, or they have congestion in one part or the other. So what it allows us to do is to focus specific organ systems to start our therapies. We have so many different systems, you can't treat them all at the same time. We have to sort of prioritize them. The CRT is then a method that we can utilize to see, and then after a few months of therapies, we can repeat the same contact regulation thermography.
Okay, so when you're doing it, is it like a scan, or are you actually directly measuring some kind of thermometer the temperature on different areas of the skin?
You are actually measuring. We're using a probe, just like a pen, and we're literally touching specific points on the skin that are related, like from Chinese medicine, to the different internal organs of the body. That's what we're measuring.
So you would take the same areas where a Chinese medical practitioner might put a needle for acupuncture, and you're instead just measuring the kind of the activity in those specific meridians to identify whether or not treatment is needed for specific areas.
That's correct. And it's a little, and yes, that's true. And people may be familiar with thermography, breast thermography, as opposed to mammography, which isn't exactly the same thing, because that's looking at heat being generated in the body. We're looking at heat that's on the surface that is being stressed by the cold. We're using that as a marker to see whether or not how stress is affecting your different organs.
Okay, got it. What about a Zytoscan? What's a Zytoscan? ZYTO.
A Zytoscan is another energetic treatment or another energetic reading. Literally, it's based on this whole idea of biofield. You literally are putting your hand on a plate, we'll say, and you're basically it's running. There's a electrical program. It's a computer program that basically is running an electrical program, and what it's doing is it's reading the energy that's basically coming from your hand on the plate. And by going through a whole variety of, we can measure many different types of things. We can look at how you're being affected by certain foods. We can look at how your organs are in balance or out of balance. We can look at whether or not there's specific microbes that particularly are more active in your body at that particular point in time. So it's another energetic scan. Once again, totally based on the whole concept of biofield and bioenergetic. And it gives us another clue that we can combine with the CRT that tells us, is there a specific area of the body that's out of balance that we need to be able to focus on? And just as an example, right now we're on this we're this side of the Rockies. Since many of our patients come from the other side of the Rockies, and since Lyme disease is such a common factor, it's uncommon almost to not find one of the Borrelia or Babesia Lyme or Lyme co-infections in somebody who lives east of the Rockies. In other words, it's pretty much in every state, but it doesn't mean everybody has Lyme disease. It just means at some point you've probably been bitten by a tick.
So Zytoscan would be one of the ways you could use to analyze whether or not you have Lyme instead of like a blot test.
I call it the soft diagnosis. Now, I use most importantly for diagnosing Lyme is what is the patient's presentation. We know that many people who have Lyme, get the bullseye rash and that type of thing, but many people don't. They never even know that they were bitten. Now, the blot test and that type of thing, everybody will agree that there's no real great test, which is why in the conventional model, chronic Lyme is like, chronic Lyme doesn't exist. It's like, well, it does exist, unfortunately, but that's medicine is what it is. But yes, the Zytoscan is another way. So I'll say to them, it may not be active, or the body, the immune system, which is constantly busy, is just keeping it in check, which thankfully it does, because we're exposed to things constantly all the time, but we all don't get sick. And why not? Is because our organ systems, our immune system, lymphatic, etc., is able to keep the body in balance, and things are just fine. So there could be an indication. It could be a soft way of looking at whether or not Lyme potentially may be part of a person's problem.
Okay, got it. And then one other form of scanning or quantification that you talk about, because there's I think over a dozen different methods you discuss in the book, and some of them I'd heard of, like heart rate variability testing and some more advanced forms of nutrient testing, and even electrophysiological testing of the brain using like EEG and electromagnetic source localization. You talk about a VEGA, VEGA, which sounds like it could be a supplement, but it's actually some type of analysis. What exactly is VEGA?
Vega specifically is the name of a German company that was formed in the early 1950s. Reinhard Voll, who was a German scientist and a German physician, came up with this idea of electrodermal testing. He was one of the original ones who came up with the idea that we could measure on acupuncture points different electrical energies. The system was incredibly complex. In fact, if you weren't an acupuncturist, you wouldn't even know where to start testing points. But having his knowledge. So one of his students was Helmut Schimmel. Schimmel is a medical doctor and a dentist. He said, this is way too complicated. We've got to figure out an easier way to do this. So he used the concept of electrodermal testing, which is basically measuring electrical energies on a specific point. But he said, what we can do is we can put it almost into like an electrical circuit. And so what he used is he created energetic vials, homeopathic vials, if you like, of thousands of different substances. So if you wanted to see whether you were sensitive to, let's say, gluten as opposed to doing a blood test. You could basically get a standard measurement with, and Vega was the machine that he went to, the company he went to, and said, "This is what I want. I want your scientists to figure out how to make this machine, this electrical machine for me." So they did. So Vega being electrical thermal testing, so in this electrical box that has some electrical components in it, it's attached with a cord, with a probe, if you like. The patient holds on to that. The doctor basically is holding the person's hand and is touching specific points on the finger. And then into the circuit, so you measure it fine, then you put some type of a resistance, you put a poison, a drug, whatever, that you know the person can't tolerate. Then you put like gluten in. And if the machine goes, it's fine, that means your gluten is not a problem for you. But if you put it in and go, gluten is interfering with your biofield energy, and say, gluten is a food, yes, you take it out. So whether you want to do that or test a pesticide or test how strong an organ is, or if you want to test whether you're going to react to a specific medication, or if you're going to find a specific medication is going to be helpful for your high blood pressure, we call that filtering. We can put two things in. So so Shinwell came up with this whole method using this machine, this company, basically called Vega testing. And so now it's all enclosed within a box because it's all energetic. And it takes a skilled practitioner to be able to read it, to be able to do the test, etc. But it's another way, we call it a soft diagnosis. And it's actually quicker and easier and more immediate than a blood test or an X-ray or any other type of imaging that we can do for somebody to gather information.
I think a lot of people are probably wondering at this point if there's actual clinical research behind this, meaning have there been studies in which someone has been shown to have a gluten intolerance or celiac or something like that via a test like Vega, and then also in follow-up testing been shown to have immunoglobulin responses to something like wheat intake, for example.
Once again, there actually have, and if somebody can read German, virtually all these studies are in Germany, and the studies have been done way back in the 70s. I mean, many, many years ago. Of all, in fact, it's, like I said earlier, you'll find mistletoe in many of the European cancer clinics. You'll also find in Germany, since Vega is a German company, that there are the individual specialists. If you go into a cardiologist's office, you'll find a Vega machine, and the cardiologist will specifically test things related to cardiology. The endocrinologist will use a Vega machine to test specific things related to endocrinology. So they're far advanced and they're far more open from the aspect that this type of measurements, not only have they been studied, but they've shown to be clinically highly effective, and you get immediate results. It's painless. You can do it on a baby 1 day old. You can do it on somebody who's 95 years old. You can do it on somebody who's in a coma. So, I mean, its compliance is really easy, and really it's not painful. It's easy to do. It's quick, that type of thing. So, yes, there are some of those studies have been published and are translated, I should say, into the English language, and if you go way back in PubMed and those types of things. If you look at EAV, VOL, studies according to VOL and that kind of thing. In fact, I mean, I don't have that available at this point, but there's quite a number of those types of research available that have been done for sure.
Yeah, I know you discuss a few of the different studies in your books. You take a deeper dive into some of this stuff. By the way, I'm looking forward to doing a lot of these quantification procedures myself, because I'll be, not in the German section, but in the Italian quarter of Switzerland when I'm at that Paracelsus clinic, and I think they do a lot of these, and I'll be there for a good 2 weeks. So I'm going to have a chance to explore a lot of this, and hopefully for those of you who are listening in, I'll get some good photos and things up on Instagram for you to see how this stuff actually looks and what I find out about myself going through that. I want to talk to you about a few other therapies in addition to mistletoe, of course. Tissue cell salts. I thought that was an interesting one. I hadn't heard of it before. What would be the indication for the use of these tissue salts, and what are they?
Tissue salts were discovered, or I'll say formulated by German. Once again, most of this stuff is out of Germany or Russia, Italy, that type of thing. So tissue salts were developed by Dr. Schussler, who was a German physician, who found that when we basically, I'll call it cremate or whatever, when we take the ash of the human body, what he did is he analyzed it. And he found that in the ash of the humans, Didn't matter what culture or anything you came from. There were the same 12 minerals in the ash. So he surmised that all our cells have these minerals in them that are necessary for health. And then what he did as a doctor, he started to say, I wonder if somebody who has certain types of conditions would benefit from doing therapeutically some of these minerals. So he developed what he's called the Schussler cell salts, or the tissue salts. And there are 12 different compounds that are basically dilute compounds. It's like ferrum phos, which is basically iron phosphate, or calc fluor, which is calcium fluoride, and caliphos, which is potassium phosphate. So there's silicon. So there are 12 minerals. And how they're used therapeutically is that because these substances, which are diluted, in other words, most of the time they're diluted 3 times. And when we say diluted, so we typically call it a 3x or a 6x, which is from a homeopathic description. It means you take one part of the mineral, let's say calc fluor, and you basically dilute it 3 times in a diluent. And then that becomes your raw material. So now it becomes a 3x calc fluor. You can also dilute it 12x, 6x, etc. So what Dr. Schussler found is if somebody had a broken bone or had osteoporosis or had some type of musculoskeletal problem as far as hard tissue is concerned, or they were healing from some type of an injury, he found that in addition to whatever other therapies were used, if he gave the tissue salts along with it, that the person would heal more quickly. So the tissue salts themselves don't physically have the minerals in them. So if you use calc fluor thinking, I'm going to use that for osteoporosis, you're also going to have a source of minerals. So you have to give some calcium and magnesium and zinc and the other 25, 75 minerals that are in bone itself, per se. And so it enhances. If we have a person who has anemia, for example, and they're taking iron, and they say, well, how come my numbers aren't getting better? If you give them something like ferrum phosphate, which is the tissue salt of iron, what you do is you facilitate easily the absorption of the iron. And so you do them in conjunction together, and you find that the iron is more efficiently absorbed. And so these, of course, have been studied for the last 150 years because Schussler was in the middle 1800s. And so they're used routinely among bioregulatory docs and by naturopaths, et cetera, because they do enhance the healing of whatever it is we're trying to support.
Is it an oral delivery, these tissue salts?
Yes, they're literally tablets. They basically look like little white mints type thing. They're these little pills, basically.
Would that be different than, so for example, I use a hypertonic solution made by Quicksilver Scientific called Quintron Minerals. Would it be something similar to that? But that's like a sea salty tasting liquid in a little pouch.
That is actual minerals itself. What is in this little tablet is not technically the mineral. What this does is that if you take the cell salt with the ionic salt, you would enhance the absorption of those ionic minerals.
Very interesting. I haven't heard of tissue salt therapy before. That's fascinating. Isn't there a form of therapy as well in European medicine in which salts or mineral solutions are injected?
Well, we certainly do IV therapies, and those are actual minerals themselves.
It's not IV therapy. I was with a group of physicians a few months ago, and someone was talking about mineral therapy that's done via some kind of injection. I thought you might know. If I can find it, I'll link to it in the show notes, or perhaps if people are listening in, they can pipe in if they know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's some type of like an actual injection of minerals. I forget what it is, but I'll hunt it down and put it in the show notes for people over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/biomedicine. Or maybe I'll think of it while you're replying to this. One of the last questions that I have for you, and that would be the use of another form of therapy called what do you call it in the book? It's a neural therapy, NEURAL therapy. What's neural therapy?
Neural therapy is Usually the injection of some type of a homeopathic remedy into specific areas of congestion, trauma points. People will have, if they have trigger points in their neck with their back, they'll typically go to a massage therapist who basically, or a rolfer or somebody who will basically use their thumb and sort of dig in there. What you're trying to do is you're trying to break up that congestion, that tight muscles. Perhaps the muscle is spasmed, that's very tense, and so maybe somebody has a headache as a result of that, or they can't turn, they can't twist their. So what we do is we literally inject. It's usually a combination of a local anesthetic, procaine commonly, or lidocaine, and then we'll use a homeopathic remedy, maybe Traumeel or Spascapril or something like that has homeopathically been known to be able to break up that fibrous type tissue. And so what it does, as all these things are doing, what it allows is better energy flow. As soon as you have better energy flow, you have better blood flow. When you have better blood flow, you have better oxygen flow. When you have better oxygen flow, you have decreased inflammation coming into the area, and you can bring all the other nutrients and things that we know about decreasing inflammation into the area. So neurotherapy is not just used in the neck or back; it can be used anyway. If you have, somewhere your knee is sore, your meniscus, or have a torn ligament somewhere, you can use neurotherapy sort of, and it's literally a sub-Q injection, meaning you just inject it under the skin, put it local to the area where the inflammation is. And unlike, people may be familiar with having a steroid injection, steroid injections actually break down the tissue. When we're doing neural injections, we're not breaking the tissue down. What we're doing is we're supplying needed nutrition and needed therapies energetic-wise to basically be able to facilitate, once again, the healing. And so neural therapies are the type of thing technically can be done almost every day because we're not going to destroy the tissue. Unlike a steroid, they say, we can't do it every 3 or 6 months because, you'll eventually just destroy your tissue.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually, there's a wonderful clinic in Pocatello, Idaho that I go to a couple times a year for high-dose vitamin C injections. It's the clinic of Dr. Jason West. And I didn't realize it was called this, but he's actually done the neural therapy on me before because he did a series of procaine injections, almost like teeny tiny little bumblebee stings, like 50 of them, into the abdomen as a sort of gut reboot. So that's what that is.
That's what that is. That is exactly correct. Yes.
Okay. I gotcha. Wow. I mean, we only really scratched the surface of these therapies that you delve into in your book. And this stuff's just so much fun to be able to discover these new therapies and things that are being done to, again, support the body's ability to be able to repair and regenerate. And also, things that really take into account this whole idea of treating the body holistically, taking into account the entire biofield. And I realize a lot of people think this woo. There'll be some allopathic medical practitioners who jump in the comment section and tell me I'm an idiot and tell you that you're a quack. But ultimately, I know this stuff is helping a lot of people. And this book, it's a quick read, but it was fantastic. I know you wrote it with 4 other co-authors in medicine. And I really enjoyed it. So it's called Bioregulatory Medicine for those of you listening in. And I'll link to it at bengreenfieldfitness.com/biomedicine. And then also, if you're interested in anything else that I talked about, like the Paracelsus Clinic that'll be in Switzerland, or some of these books on seasonal eating, I'll even put some helpful links to Kirlian photography, etc. And if I can find that mineral injection I was referring to, I'll link to that as well. You can find all of that at bengreenfieldfitness.com/biomedicine, along with Dr. Thom's website, which is the biomedcenter.com down in Scottsdale. And I would imagine if somebody is in the Scottsdale area wanting to travel there, you probably have a lot of these devices at your clinic, Dr. Thom?
We do. We have them all.
Cool. Maybe I'll have to come in for a tour sometime and check it out. I like to discover stuff like this. So thanks for coming on the show, man. This is fascinating.
It's my pleasure. Anytime.
Awesome. All right, well, folks, I'm Ben Greenfield, along with Dr. Dixon Thom, signing out from bengreenfieldfitness.com/biomedicine. Have an amazing week, and go leave your comments, your questions, and any other thoughts you have in the show notes if you want to continue this conversation even more. Well, thanks for listening to today's show. You can grab all the show notes, the resources, pretty much everything that I mentioned over at bengreenfieldfitness.com, along with plenty of other goodies from me, including the highly helpful Ben Recommends page, which is a list of pretty much everything that I've ever recommended for hormones, sleep, digestion, fat loss, performance, and plenty more. Please also know that all the links, all the promo codes that I mentioned during this and every episode help to make this podcast happen and to generate income that enables me to keep bringing you this content every single week. So when you listen in, be sure to use the links in the show notes, use the promo codes that I generate, because that helps to float this thing and keep it coming to you each and every week.